Snow had started falling around 4 that afternoon, the soft kind that doesn't stick at first, just dust the windshield like powdered sugar. I remember thinking how pretty it looked through the classroom window while my second graders practiced their winter recital. I remember Mrs. A. Halverson, the music teacher, telling me my Margaret looked like a star up there in her green velvet dress, even though I told her gently that Margaret was actually my niece performing because I'd been the one to drive her. My own kids had grown and gone. It was just me and my husband Daniel in that house on Beach Street now, the one we bought when we were young and stupid and thought love was enough. I left the school concert at 6:15. I told my sister Claire I'd see her at her place around 8 for hot chocolate and gifts, and I drove home through streets that were starting to glaze over with that thin layer of black ice you only feel when your tires lose grip for half a second and your heart catches in your throat. I was going home to grab the casserole I'd made that morning and to change out of the dress I'd worn for the concert. I was going to put on jeans and that ugly cardigan Claire's husband always teased me about. I was going to be normal. Except when I turned onto our street, I saw the moving truck. It was parked sideways in our driveway, its yellow rental logo bright against the grey dusk, and there were boxes stacked on the front lawn. My boxes. I knew because I could see the green Tupperware lid sticking out of one, the same lid I'd been hunting for since Thanksgiving. There was a man in a brown jacket carrying my grandmother's rocking chair down the porch steps. The chair Grandma Ruth had rocked me in when I was 4 years old and had pneumonia, and she stayed up 3 nights straight singing hymns until my fever broke. I parked across the street. I don't remember deciding to. I just remember sitting there with the engine still running, the wipers going back and forth, watching another man come out carrying my winter coats in a black trash bag like they were garbage. Then I saw her in the upstairs window, our bedroom window. She was wearing my robe, the cream-colored one with the embroidered roses that Daniel had given me for our 20th anniversary. She had a coffee mug in her hand, and she was looking down at the men working in the yard like she was supervising, like she lived there. She must have been 28, maybe 30. Blonde, the kind of blonde that costs money to keep that color through a Vermont winter. And she saw my car. She saw me sitting there. And she did not move from that window. She just lifted the mug to her lips and watched me watch her. That's when Daniel came out of the front door. He didn't see me at first. He was carrying my jewelry box, the wooden one my father had built me for my 16th birthday before he died, and he set it down on the lawn next to a stack of my photo albums. He set it down in the snow. And then he turned around and saw my Subaru parked across the street, and he froze for exactly 2 seconds before he raised his hand and waved at me, like a neighbor, like we were neighbors, and he was just going about his evening. I don't know how I got out of the car. I don't know how my legs worked. But I remember the cold hitting my face, and I remember the way my breath came out in clouds. And I remember Daniel walking down the driveway toward me with his hands held up like he was approaching a spooked animal. "Now, Helen," he said. "I was going to call you." I looked at him. I looked at the boxes on the lawn. I looked at the trash bag full of my coats. I looked up at the bedroom window where she was still standing, watching us like we were a movie she'd ordered up for her evening entertainment. "Who is she?" I said. My voice sounded normal. That surprised me. "Helen, you need to go somewhere else right now. We can talk tomorrow. I'll call you tomorrow." "Who is she, Daniel?" He exhaled through his nose, the way he did when I asked him to take the trash out. Annoyed. Inconvenienced. "Her name is Brittany. She's been staying here. We're going to be making some changes." I noticed then that the front door had a different handle, brass instead of bronze. The lock was new. "You changed the locks," I said. "It's my house, Helen." I almost laughed. That's the thing, nobody tells you about moments like this. Sometimes you almost laugh because the person in front of you is saying something so impossibly stupid that your brain can't process it any other way. "It's our house," I said. "It's my name on the deed." I noticed our neighbor Patricia across the way standing on her porch with her phone up, filming. I noticed Mr. Chen 2 houses down doing the same thing. I noticed at least 3 other phones in 3 other windows. The whole block was watching, and I realized then that they had been watching for a while. Hours, probably. They'd seen the truck pull in. They'd seen the woman in my robe come out for the newspaper that morning. They'd seen 1,000 small wrongnesses, and now they were here for the ending. Daniel saw the phones too. His jaw tightened. "Get in your car and leave," he said. "Lower now. Don't make a scene. I'll have Brittany pack up the rest of your things tomorrow and we can arrange a pickup." Brittany. Pack up the rest of my things. Like I was a tenant who'd missed rent. I walked past him. I walked up the driveway, past the moving men who paused and looked uncertainly at each other. I walked up to the front door and tried my key. It didn't fit. I knew it wouldn't, but I had to feel it. I had to feel my own key not turning in my own door. I turned around. Daniel was right behind me, and Brittany had come down to the foyer now, watching through the storm door, still holding that mug. My mug. The one our daughter Sarah had made me in pottery class when she was 9, with the lopsided handle and the words, "Best Mom," painted in shaky purple letters. I looked at my husband of 26 years. I looked at the woman drinking from my daughter's first attempt at love. I looked at my grandmother's chair sitting in the snow. And I did not cry. I walked back down the driveway. I walked back down the driveway. I walked past Daniel, who was saying something I didn't hear. I got in my car, I closed the door, and I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, looking at the dashboard, listening to the quiet ticking of the heater fan. Then I picked up my phone. I scrolled past Claire. I scrolled past my son Michael in Denver. I scrolled past my daughter Sarah in Boston. I scrolled all the way down to a contact I'd never called in my entire life, a number I'd carried in my phone for 15 years because Grandma Ruth had told me to put it in there and not to delete it, no matter what. The contact name was just one word, Walter. He answered on the second ring. "Helen," he said, and there was something in his voice that told me he already knew, that he'd been waiting. "Where are you, sweetheart?" "I'm in my car." "Outside the house." Daniel changed the locks. "There's a woman in my robe. There's a moving truck." There was a pause, just a breath. "Stay in the car. Keep it running, keep it warm. I'm 25 minutes out. Do not engage with him again. Do not sign anything. Do not say anything to the neighbors. Just sit tight." "Walter, what is happening?" "Your grandmother told me this might happen. She told me a long time ago. I have everything. Just wait for me." He hung up. I sat there in my car as the snow got heavier, watching the men carry the last of my life out onto the lawn. I watched Daniel hand Brittany a glass of wine through the storm door. I watched her laugh at something he said. I watched her tilt her head back and laugh, in my house, in my robe, drinking my wine, while my mother's quilt sat in a hefty bag in a snowbank. 23 minutes later, a black Lincoln pulled up behind me. The man who got out was 81 years old, 6'2", wearing a charcoal overcoat and the kind of leather gloves you only see on lawyers in old movies. Walter Hennessy. My grandmother, Ruth's younger brother, a retired federal judge from the District of Vermont. The man who had married them, my grandfather and grandmother, in 1953, and who had buried his sister 14 months ago, and who I had not seen since the funeral. He walked to my window. I rolled it down. "Helen," he said, and he leaned in and kissed my forehead the way Grandma Ruth used to. "You're going to want to step out of the vehicle now. We have some things to do." I got out. He took my arm. He had a leather portfolio under his other arm, the kind with the elastic band and the soft worn corners. We walked together up the driveway, past the boxes, past the rocking chair, past Patricia's phone and Mr. Chen's phone, and all the phones of all the neighbors I'd waved to for 2 decades. Daniel saw us coming. He stepped out of the doorway and pulled the storm door shut behind him. "Who the hell are you?" he said. Walter didn't answer right away. He just looked at Daniel for a long, slow moment. The kind of look I'd only ever seen from one other person in my entire life. And that person was my grandmother Ruth, and that look had once made a state senator stammer. "My name is Walter Hennessy," he said. "I'm Helen's great-uncle. I'm also the trustee of the Hennessy Family Trust. And I have some documents you need to look at, son. I don't know who you think you are, but this is my house and you're trespassing." Walter unzipped the portfolio. He took out a thick stack of papers, stapled and tabbed, and he held them out. "This is your house, is it? It's my name on the deed. Helen and I have been separated for months. I have every legal right, Mr. Calloway," Walter said, and his voice was so quiet it made everything else stop. "May I see the deed you're referring to?" Daniel hesitated. "It's inside." "I'll wait." Daniel went inside. I could hear him talking to Brittany, his voice rising. She came to the door behind him, holding the mug, looking at us with the kind of confused contempt you'd give a stranger asking for change. Daniel came back out with a manila folder. He pulled out a deed. He thrust it at Walter. Walter looked at it for about 10 seconds. Then he looked up at Daniel. "Son," he said, "this deed is forged." Daniel's face did something I'd never seen before. It went still in a way that wasn't blank, but braced, like a man watching a tree fall toward him in slow motion. "What did you say?" "I said this deed is forged. Poorly, I might add. The notary stamp is from a notary whose commission expired in 2019. The signature you've copied of Ruth Hennessy is from her 1998 will, which I know because I drafted that will. And the property identification number you've used is the parcel number of the lot, but the actual title to this house has been held in irrevocable trust since 2003, when your wife's grandmother transferred it to a vehicle called the Beach Street Land Trust, of which Helen is the sole beneficiary and I am the sole trustee." He paused. "You don't own this house, Mr. Calloway. You never did. Helen doesn't own it either, technically. The trust does, but Helen is the only living person who can occupy it, sell it, or modify it. And you, sir, just had a paid moving company remove her belongings under false pretenses, with photographic evidence being collected by approximately 7 of your neighbors as we speak." Brittany had stopped smiling. She had taken one step back from the door. "That's not possible," Daniel said. "I have a copy of the deed. I had a lawyer. I'm sure you did. I'd like to know which one. But I'd also like to know how exactly you intended to sell a property you don't own, because that's what I'm seeing here. I have a copy of your listing on Zillow from yesterday. I have a copy of the wire transfer initiated this morning from a buyer named Brittany Whelan to an LLC registered to you in Delaware 3 weeks ago. I have a copy of the loan you took out against this house in October, using documents that match the forgeries in your hand." He looked over Daniel's shoulder at Brittany. "Miss Whelan, is it? You wired $140,000 to my niece's husband this morning to purchase this home. Do I have that right?" Brittany's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You may want to call your bank in the morning," Walter said gently. "There's a chance you can recall the wire if it hasn't cleared. There's also a chance you can't. Either way, I'd retain counsel tonight." Daniel was holding the forged deed in his hand, and I watched it tremble. "Helen," he said. "Helen, listen, I can explain. This is not what it—" "Don't speak to her," Walter said. "From this moment forward, all communication goes through me or her counsel. We will be filing a report with the Vermont State Police tonight regarding the forgery of property documents, the fraudulent sale of real estate, and the wire fraud associated with the loan you took out in October. The federal piece will be handled separately. I'd like you to step off the porch now." Daniel didn't move. I said, "Step off the porch, Mr. Calloway." He stepped off. Walter turned to me. His face softened just for a second, and he was Uncle Walter again, the man who taught me to fish on Lake Champlain when I was 9. "Helen, sweetheart, I need you to do something hard right now. I need you to walk inside your house. The trust has a key safe by the back door. The combination is your grandmother's birthday. I need you to go in there and gather Miss Whelan's belongings and place them on the porch. I need you to do it calmly and on camera. The neighbors are recording, and that's good. That's what we want. Can you do that?" I nodded. I didn't trust my voice yet. "I'm coming with you," he said. "Mr. Calloway is going to wait on the sidewalk." We walked past Daniel. We walked past Brittany, who stepped aside without a word. Walter took the mug out of her hand as we passed and set it on the entry table, very gently, like he was handling evidence. We walked into my house. My house. The hardwood floors my grandfather had laid in 1962. The kitchen where I'd taught Sarah how to make pie crust. The bedroom where I had slept beside a man who'd been planning this for at least 3 weeks, probably longer. There was a suitcase by the bed. Pink. Brand new. I picked it up. I walked it down the stairs. I set it on the porch. I went back up. There were toiletries in my bathroom, makeup that wasn't mine on my vanity, a man's watch I didn't recognize on the nightstand on Daniel's side that I figured was probably the watch she'd given him. I gathered all of it. I made 3 trips. The neighbors filmed every single one. Patricia waved at me. I waved back. When the porch was full, Walter closed the front door. He turned the deadbolt. He took out his phone and called the locksmith he'd apparently had on standby because a van pulled up 8 minutes later. While the locksmith worked, Walter sat me down at my own kitchen table and made me a cup of tea. He used the best mom mug. I watched him rinse it 3 times in scalding water before he poured the tea. "How long did Grandma know?" I asked. He sat down across from me. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. She suspected from the first Christmas she met him, 1998, she told me he had eyes that didn't track right. She said, "Walter, that boy is calculating something every minute of every day." I told her she was being paranoid. She told me to put the house in trust anyway, just in case. I drew up the papers in 2003, the year your daughter was born. Ruth signed it the same week. "Why didn't she tell me?" He smiled, a little sadly. "Because she wanted you to have the marriage you thought you had, for as long as it lasted. She told me, Walter, if I'm wrong, she never has to know. And if I'm right, she'll need somewhere to land." I looked at the best mom mug. I thought about my grandmother, dead 14 months, who had loved me enough to plan for the worst day of my life 2 decades before it happened. "I don't know what I would have done," I said, "if you hadn't come." "Your grandmother knew exactly what you would have done," Walter said. "You would have called me. That's why she gave you my number when you were 30 years old and made you promise never to delete it. She knew her granddaughter." I started crying then, not the loud kind, the slow kind, where it just leaks out and you can't stop it. Walter let me cry for a long time. Then he reached across the table and took my hand. "There's more, sweetheart. There are things you need to know about Daniel that aren't going to be easy. Are you ready, or do you need a few minutes? Tell me." He told me. He told me that for the past 4 years, Daniel had been quietly draining our retirement accounts, taking small withdrawals that wouldn't trigger notifications, moving them into accounts in his name only. He told me that the loan against the house in October had been used to pay off a debt to a man in Burlington who Daniel apparently owed for reasons that were going to come out in the federal investigation. He told me that Brittany Whelan was not just some woman Daniel had met. She was an assistant manager at the credit union where Daniel had been forging documents for the past 6 months. She was facing her own set of charges. The wire she'd sent that morning to buy the house was almost certainly money she'd taken from somewhere she shouldn't have, because no honest assistant credit union manager has $140,000 liquid in her checking account. "Your husband and his girlfriend," Walter said carefully, "are both going to be very busy with attorneys for the next several years. I don't say this to be cruel. I say it because you need to understand that the man you're going to face in court is not going to be the man you married. He's going to be a desperate man trying to save himself, and he's going to try to take you down with him if he can. That's why I need you to do exactly what I tell you for the next 90 days, and not a thing more or less." I nodded. I asked him what I needed to do. He told me. We spent the next 2 hours at that kitchen table, drinking tea, going through documents. He had everything. Bank statements, trust paperwork, a draft divorce petition, photographs of Brittany leaving our house at 6 in the morning that he'd had a private investigator take 3 weeks ago after a former colleague at the credit union had tipped him off about Daniel's activities. Walter had been preparing for this day, quietly, methodically, since November. "I would have called you weeks ago," he said, "but Ruth always said the timing of these things matters. She said let him hang himself with enough rope, and she was right. He moved the truck in today. He chose the day. We just had to be ready when he did." Around 11 that night, my sister Claire arrived. Walter had called her. She came in with her husband Mark and a casserole dish and 3 bottles of wine and a look on her face that said somebody was going to die tonight and it wasn't going to be me. She hugged me until my ribs hurt. Then she walked out onto the porch and stood there glaring at the pile of pink luggage like she could set it on fire with her eyes. By midnight, Patricia from across the street had come over with her grown daughter, who turned out to be a paralegal at a firm in Montpelier and had already started drafting an affidavit of what she'd witnessed. By 1 in the morning, Mr. Chen had brought over a printed transcript of his security camera footage going back 6 weeks. By 2, 3 other neighbors had texted me video clips that would, in a few weeks, become Exhibits A through F in a federal indictment. Daniel and Brittany spent that night, I was told later, in a Days Inn off the interstate. He slept in the truck. She wouldn't let him in the room. The morning came pale and gold and freezing. I woke up on my own couch in my own house, with my sister's arm draped across my legs. There was a Christmas tree in the corner that I hadn't put up. Walter had put it up sometime before he left with the boxes of ornaments he'd somehow known where to find. He put my mother's angel on the top. The next 90 days were ugly. The criminal case became a federal case, became a plea deal. Daniel got 6 years, Brittany got 4. The credit union she worked at collapsed under the audit that followed and was absorbed by a regional bank, which was its own small tragedy for the people who worked there. The $140,000 she'd wired turned out to have been embezzled from elderly customers' accounts, and it was returned to them with interest paid by the bank. Brittany lost everything. So did Daniel. They turned on each other before either of them was even arraigned. There would be no romantic reunion in any future. There would be no shared bitterness over coffee in a cheap motel. There would just be 2 small, ugly lives, lived separately, paying for what they'd done. Sarah and Michael came home for what was left of Christmas. We didn't open presents. We sat on the floor at the living room with Walter and Claire and ate Chinese takeout and cried and laughed at things that weren't really funny. Sarah found her old best mom mug in the kitchen and held it for a long time. I'd already washed it 6 times. She washed it again. In February, I had Patricia and 3 other neighbors over for what Claire called the cleansing. We bagged up everything Brittany had ever touched and took it to the dump. We repainted the bedroom. We replaced the mattress. We replaced the sheets, the pillows, the duvet, the curtains, the lamp on the nightstand, the rug. I burned the cream-colored robe in the fireplace. Patricia brought a sage smudge stick that her daughter-in-law swore by, and we walked through every room of the house, all 5 of us, and I said out loud what I wanted that room to be from now on. Sarah's old room became a guest room. Michael's became a sewing room. The bedroom became mine, just mine. In March, Walter sat me down at the same kitchen table and showed me the rest of the trust. There were assets I hadn't known about, bonds. Grandma Ruth had been buying since the 70s. A small commercial property in Burlington that generated rental income. A college fund for grandchildren I didn't have yet. My grandmother had quietly built a fortress around me my whole life, and I had walked through it without ever knowing the walls were there. She loved you, Walter said. She loved you more than she loved anyone, including me. And she knew. Knew what? That a woman who marries young needs to be protected from her own kindness. She used to say that about you. Helen is too kind, she'd say. She'll trust the wrong man and not see it until it's too late. So we'll see it for her. I sat with that for a long time. In April, the snow finally melted. I planted tulips along the front walk where Daniel had dragged my suitcases. Patricia came over with coffee one morning and we sat on the porch and watched the bulbs push up green through the mud. She told me that the neighborhood group chat had given me a nickname, the quiet one. Because I hadn't yelled, I hadn't cried, I'd just made a phone call. Truth is, I told her, I was screaming inside the whole time. I know, she said, but that's the part nobody else has to see. That part's just yours. I think about that a lot now. About the parts that are just mine. The part of my marriage I'll never get back. The part of my grandmother that lived on in a manila folder in a trust she set up before my children were born. The part of myself that picked up the phone that night and dialed a number I'd never called because somewhere deep down I'd always known I might need to. The house remembers. That's what I tell people now when they ask how I'm doing. The house remembers who built its bones, and who slept in its rooms with bad intentions, and who came back to it on a snowy night carrying nothing but a phone and the key that didn't work. The house remembers, and I do too. And I sleep in that bedroom now, alone, under a quilt my mother made the year I was born, and I am not afraid of the dark anymore. Grandma Ruth would have been proud. I think she is. I think she's proud, and I think she's resting easy, and I think somewhere in whatever room she's in now, she has set the kettle on, she's making tea. She knew I would come home. She knew the house would be mine. She knew, the way she knew everything, with the long, slow patience of a woman who had seen her share of bad men and outlived all of them. I am 51 years old. I am a teacher. I am a mother and a sister and a great niece. I am, as of last week, a divorced woman with a house in her own name and a good lawyer and a trust fund I didn't know I had. I am the granddaughter of Ruth Hennessy, who never raised her voice in her life and who buried 2 husbands and 3 brothers and outlived them all by being the smartest person in every room she ever walked into. I am her. Some small piece of me is her. And I am going to be all right. The kettle is on, the snow is gone, the house remembers, and so do I. I've thought about that night every single morning since it happened. Not in a bitter way anymore. More like the way you think about a fork in the road you almost missed. I think about how close I came to driving past my own house that evening. How close I came to never picking up that phone. How close I came to walking into that storm without knowing my grandmother had been holding an umbrella over my head for 23 years. The thing nobody tells you about the trail is that it doesn't really come out of nowhere. It builds. Daniel didn't wake up one morning and decide to forge a deed. He had been quietly becoming that man for years, in small choices I didn't see because I didn't want to see them, the late nights at work that I told myself were ambition, the withdrawals from our retirement that he explained away as taxes, the new watch he said he bought himself for his birthday. Cause and effect is patient. It waits. It lets a person plant the seeds of their own ruin and water them faithfully, year after year, until the harvest comes due. What saved me wasn't luck. It was Grandma Ruth, 50 years before I needed her, deciding that loving someone meant preparing for the day they might be hurt. She wasn't paranoid. She was wise. There's a difference, and the difference is that wisdom looks at human nature without flinching and plans accordingly. She didn't poison me against Daniel. She let me have my marriage, but she made sure that if it ever broke open, I'd have a floor under my feet. I've come to believe that real strength isn't the kind that yells. It's the kind that picks up the phone. It's the kind that walks into a kitchen full of strangers' belongings and bags them up calmly while 7 cameras roll. It's the kind that lets a man bury himself with his own shovel instead of grabbing it from his hands. Daniel and Brittany weren't undone by my anger. They were undone by their own choices, lined up like dominoes they themselves had set, waiting only for someone to refuse to flinch when the first one fell. And the lesson I keep coming back to is this: be the kind of person who deserves to be protected, and protect someone else while you're at it. My grandmother saw something in me worth saving years before I knew I'd need saving. I want to be that for someone too, a niece, a neighbor, a young woman at the school where I teach who comes in one Monday with a quiet bruise she doesn't talk about. I want to be the phone number somebody carries for 15 years and never deletes. We don't always get to choose what happens to us, but we get to choose who we become afterward. I chose to come home. I chose to keep the house. I chose to plant tulips where my suitcases had been thrown. And every spring now, when those tulips push up green through the mud, I remember that the worst night of my life was also the night I found out exactly how loved I had been, all along, by a woman who had been gone for over a year.